How you doing, folks? You're watching Live with Onrie, and I'm your host, Onrie Compen. Today, I got an amazing guest here. I got connected with her on Twitter. She is a writer, an editor, and and also an instructor. She works for the Joe Kubert School and for Comics Experience. She's got a lot of different projects in the works, and I'm looking forward to getting to know her better. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Erica Schultz. Erica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a hell of an intro. I hope I live up to it.
No, of course you live up to it. That's why I asked you on here. Do us a favor. Tell us who you are, what you do, because no one can do it better than you.
Okay, well, I'm Erica Schultz. I am a writer and an editor with Mad Cave Studios. I've written for Marvel, DC, Image, a whole bunch of different publishers. And I'm currently an editor at Mad Cave, and I am writing a series called The Legacy of Mandrake the Magician for King Features and Red 5. And we just announced that for San Diego Comic-Con. And I'm an instructor at the Kubert School. I'm one of the writing instructors at the Kubert School. I also teach story adaptation and narrative.
That's awesome. All right, so let's go into this because I'm fascinated to hear about your career in comics. But the one thing I want to start with is your origin story. How did you get into this field, and how did you kind of like work your way up to working at Marvel? Because you worked on Daredevil for a bit, and then you went off to do these other projects. So, take it from there.
Okay. So, well, I grew up reading comics. I have an older brother, and I would, steal whatever he brought home and, like a good younger sister does. And, I always enjoyed storytelling. I enjoyed film and television and just, creating different stories, creating different worlds. And when I was working at an ad agency as an art director for many years, and layoffs happened, and this was right around 2007, 2008. So I know a lot of people got laid off around them. So layoffs happened, and I was looking for a new gig, and I had gotten into a really terrible car accident.
No.
Just before I had an interview actually that day, and I got into this terrible car accident. So I had to cancel the interview. And while I was healing from the car accident, I just started writing. It was more of like a therapeutic kind of thing. And I started writing a story that ended up being the bones for what turned into M3, which was the first comic that I ever wrote. After I healed up from the car accident, I got a job at a studio in New York City called Continuity Studios. And I was an animator on the Astonishing X-Men motion comic, Gifted. And I got I started working at the studio, doing backgrounds and lettering and, inking assists and color assists and things like that. And really seeing, all the different aspects of comics production, script writing and everything, and really getting my education there. So having loved comics always, never really thinking about it being a career, I shifted gears and said, okay, well, I had this story that I wrote when I was in a really vulnerable place. Let me see if I can find a way to translate this story into comics, into the visual medium of comics. One of the other artists that was at the studio is a man named Vicente Alcazar, and he was working on Astonishing X-Men with us as well. And I had approached him about doing the M3. And he read the script, and he really liked it. And we ended up doing 12 issues over about 3.5 years.
So give us the pitch of M3. What is your book about?
M3 is an assassin being chased down by the FBI. She's trying to track down parts of her past and the truth of her past. And she kind of got caught up with this FBI agent who's trying to basically hunt her down and bring her to justice.
And what was this a project that you like wanted to do for a long time, or is it just something like you were like, all right, I love James Bond, I like all these kind of like spy action stuff, I just want to get into it and make a fun comic that I can hit a large demographic with?
Well, I always really liked the whole cat and mouse crime thriller genre. My dad used to read a lot of Tom Clancy novels and things like that. And I always liked that real world kind of street level gritty kind of stuff. I mean, despite that, I loved sci-fi and other things, but I really wanted to get my feet wet in something that was street level. So this way the world building wasn't so crazy. I mean, I didn't have to create a world. We live in this world. I don't have to explain to the audience the rules of the world because it already exists. So I guess if you could, I was sort of like gently sort of soft launching into it with this. But I really, I mean, I loved the show like Burn Notice, and I loved like a lot of cop shows and stuff growing up and stuff. So I wanted to do something that had sort of that, not so much mystery, but had like that twist to it and had that sort of urgency. Because I feel like all of these shows, you get 44 minutes on TV, and there's, from day one, from the moment the TV, turns on, it's this sort of urgency. And I really wanted a story that was going to be just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And that sort of parallels the fact that she has to keep moving. She has to keep moving. She has to keep changing her name. She has to keep, because even though she's searching for stuff, she's still got somebody on her tail. So I liked that idea of like that consistent, almost like breakneck speed kind of thing. I've slowed things down with other stories that I've done since then, because M3 came out, the first issue came out in 2010. Well, the first and second issue came out at the same time in 2010. So it's been a while. And since then, I've gotten more comfortable with writing, in the sense that I've gotten more comfortable with slowing the story down and giving more emotional beats, and giving space, giving scenes air. Whereas, it's funny, I say that M3 is like my favorite book that I've written, because I broke a lot of rules because I didn't know the rules that existed at the time. So there was a freedom to that. There really was. It's kind of like how like Douglas Adams says that, children can fly because they don't know that they can't. And when you become adult, you can't fly anymore. It's that sort of same idea of, I didn't know how to do it, but I didn't know how not to do it. So I just did it. And since then, I've sort of been more structured in the way I've written. And obviously now that I'm teaching writing, I teach the students a paradigm for writing and structure and things like that. But at the time I have a story, I'm just going to tell a story. And that's basically how it was. And there were a lot of mistakes that were made in that first series, like absolutely. But it was very freeing. And it was really sort of like jump in the pool with all your clothes on, and you're still going to be okay. So I was very, very lucky. And I was very fortunate to work with Vicente, who is a master artist, a master illustrator. And he really, any place that I was lacking, he filled in, because he knew exactly where to go, where the story would go. And he knew if I was not articulating it, how to then articulate it artistically.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Okay. I really love that, where artists can come in and contribute on that front, because I think with writers particularly, I'm editing another project right now, and the writer, he had a test page. He just hired his artist yesterday, and he had a test page with too many panels in it. And at the time when I read the script, I was kind of thinking, maybe there are too many panels here, but let's see what an artist does with this. And you can see that the right artist will make it work. That there's no such thing as too many panels. I mean, you look at guys like George Perez, who can fit every single character in the Marvel universe into like one tiny little, horizontal panel. It just shows you what kind of, it shows you how powerful the collaboration is in comics between the writer and the artist. And speaking to that, so you mentioned you and the artist were working together at this other studio.
Yes.
So were you guys in the same town? Did you guys see each other when collaborating, or did he live in some other part of the world? Like, Where is he based
Well,
out
at
of?
the time, we were working in-house. We weren't working remotely. Like everybody's working remotely
Right,
now.
right.
At the time, we were both working in New York City. He originally is from Spain. Vicente is originally from Spain, but we were both working in New York at the time, and he was there for several months. He had lived in New York for a million years earlier and everything, and would come back often. And so when he left and then ended up going back to Spain, we continued, but it was just, through email and, making sure that you remember that it's 6 hours ahead over there.
Yeah, sure.
And so like I would get emails at like 2:00 in the morning, my time. And it's because, he's having his morning coffee and he, read over the script, while, drinking morning coffee and having breakfast and decided and had some notes, kind of thing. But yeah, and then every time he would come back to New York subsequently, we would then, work hand in hand. But so it was sort of like back and forth, although I do know several, the project that I just completed with ComiXology Originals, Forgotten Home, the artist Marika Cresta is in Italy, and I have never met Marika personally. I was hoping to meet her at New York Comic Con, but something tells me that that's not going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately.
It is what it is, and in all honesty, it's best to keep everyone safe. But we worked together for just over a year, no more than that. Yeah, it was February 2019 till just this past May. So we worked together for a year and change, and we've never met each other in person. So it is interesting how the internet has really opened up the world in terms of the fact that we can communicate with people and work with artists, all over the world. When I worked on, when I did a Hawk Girl short for DC, the artist that I got to work with was Sunny Liu, who's like fantastic. Just, I love Sunny's work, does great work, was a huge fan of Dr. Fate that he did with Paul Levitz. And Sunny was not in the United States when we were working on it at all. And then I ended up meeting him at San Diego about a year or two after we had worked together. But, having the opportunity to work via email or like, Skype calls, Zoom calls, whatever, is actually really, really great. And I feel like it has completely opened up the world for people, for writers looking for artists and for artists looking for collaborators and things like that. I've been very fortunate to work with some incredible artists and colorists and letterers just all over the place. Gab Contreras, who's in Peru, Adriana Mello, who's in Brazil, Joe Prado, who's in Brazil, these fantastic artists, Stellaria, who's in Spain, these great artists and colorists all over the place. And the only way that it works is because technology. Thank you. Thank you.
No, absolutely. And it's funny because I work with a few South American artists myself, and they are so committed to the projects that they're working on. Not to say that there's any difference between them and say someone who's based here, but it gives you a lot of perspective and I think experience. It's something to like add to your notch that like, yes, I can work with internet. I can assemble and work with this with international teams. And that's like something that I think like, when you look at what we do as comic creators, I think that there's a lot of skills that we learn that kind of get swept under the rug in the corporate sense, because it's not like we're sitting there like putting together, learning like software and, learning all these different types of organizational models and things like that. But we're learning how to communicate with people whose English is not as strong, which I think is a very important thing. We're learning how to basically create something out of nothing with someone who can barely speak 2 words of English, but can just, can make out enough that they can actually like, get their thoughts on paper. And I think that's an important thing. Now, I kind of want to transition this because I think it's really fascinating. So you're teaching as well.
Yes.
And you're teaching writing. And I think probably I would think that probably one of the most important things you want to get across to your students as a writing teacher is clarity, so that they can replicate what you're doing essentially. And once they, go on to form their own projects, that they can assemble a creative team and work with people internationally. Because there's another aspect to this too, from a business standpoint. you're saving money when you work with people internationally in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, depending on kind of like the level of the art. But that's something to be considerate about, because let's face it, when you're starting out in comics, you know, you're not really, you don't really have a bottomless, you know, pit when it comes to money. So what are the kinds of things that you kind of really try to stress when you're teaching?
Well, I mean, I teach two different classes. I teach a class at the Kubert School with the students, and then I teach an online class associated with the Kubert School for scripting. And the last session of that, we do an AMA. And I go through the like the industry as a whole. I go through talking to international artists. One of the things that I do stress in both classes is that you, as a creator, we tend to be very myopic and very inside our own heads. And we don't always articulate what we want on the page. And you want to minimize the back and forth. You want to minimize revisions. You want to minimize all of that. So on the upfront, make sure that everything that you are writing is clear. I essentially act as editor for the students. So they send me scripts, I read them, and I tend to have a lot of questions. And so I'll say, well, what about this character? What about that character? Oh, blah, 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 blah. And they'll rattle it off. Okay, that's great, but it's not here. And if it's not on this piece of paper, then it doesn't exist. And so I try and reinforce that. I also try and reinforce that for me, I talk about how comics and collaboration of comics is a wheel, and the center of the wheel is the project. And all the different people, all the players, your production artist, your editor, your writer, your colorist, your inker, your letterer, whatever, they're all little spokes on the wheel. Basically, if you don't have that centerpiece, then you can have as many spokes as you want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make a wheel. So as a collaborative group, I know it's difficult and people don't want to hear this, but put your ego to the side and elevate the work. If the work is the number one thing on everybody's mind, then that's what's going to benefit the most. If it's, oh, well, we did one of my idea and one of their idea and one of their, and you're keeping track or anything like that, then the work is going to suffer. So push the ego aside, focus on the work. And one of the other things that I stress, because especially when I'm teaching at the Kubert School, I'm teaching scripting to artists. And a lot of them are like, oh, well, I'm just going to draw this script on my own. So what does it matter? Well, it does matter, because learning how to break things down and write them is important. It's important for communication skills. It's also important because if you learn how to write a script properly, then when you get your first script, you'll know how to read it properly. And that sometimes they don't, sometimes new artists don't know how to really read a script. And so I really try and focus on structure. I focus on the more academic things like storytelling and 3-act and things like that. But when it comes to sort of the mechanics of storytelling, like the mechanics of something as simple as like a template of how your script is supposed to actually look, I really want to hammer home certain things, especially because you want to make sure that your letterer knows what their, you know, your script is formatted properly for your letterer. You want to know your script is formatted properly for your artist. It's not confusing. Your colorist knows whether it's daytime or nighttime or whatever. So I really focus hard on that, because I truly believe that if you know how to do different spokes, ultimately you're going to be a stronger creator. So I am primarily a writer, but I have been a colorist, a letterer, an editor, an inker. I've penciled backgrounds, I've done production, I've done all of those things. And I think having that background knowledge helps me be a better writer, because I keep those things in mind when I'm writing something. I don't want to write a huge paragraph of dialogue for one panel, because I know that the letterer is not, that's not feasible for the letterer to do. So I keep that in mind, and I try to instill that in all the students, whether it's taking the online course or teaching Kubert in person.
I want to speak to two things and commend you on both of them. The first thing that I really want to give you credit for is
talking with my hands a lot.
I think we all do that, you know. Here, I'm doing it now. There we go. But the first thing I wanted to say was your first comment on teaching was that you ask your students questions, which I think is the best way to go about critiquing. You know, I find it that there are some people who are so intimidated about that critique because they're worried about getting their asses handed to them. And I don't think that's what critiques are really designed for. Anybody who's going to hand you your ass on a platter when critiquing you is not really there to help you build up what you're trying to do. They're just trying to break you down. And by asking questions, I think you're showing them that, hey, look, you know, this is what I need to actually work on. And the second thing is that, you know, you really kind of iron home the point that one of the other big skills that you're teaching, aside from just scripting, is teamwork. Yeah. Because you're trying to eliminate the amount of revisions done, right? So, you know, being as clear as possible to the students and see, look at all these gestures here, you know, to the artists, I should say, is essential, and making it about the work. I think that's the most important thing, because it's not about you. It's not about, everything must serve the story. You know, I think we can all agree with this on every writer and every artist can agree that, you know, everything must serve the story. And, you know, you do see that a lot, particularly with creators who want that attention, who want to kind of like come into the center stage. But I don't think you can get there if you don't understand that this is a team game. You know, if you're not here to play and work together as one, you're basically forming Voltron every time you like create a comic. You know?
That is it. I'm going to use that. I'm going to borrow that.
Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Of course. And, you know, like you're trying to make it all work. And sometimes you have collaborators that it doesn't necessarily work out with. And I found that doesn't happen as often. Most of the time when you go through the process of trying to hire someone, you want to find somebody that you want to find a good dance partner, right? You want to find somebody that is gonna know what to do when the time comes. And I think that it's really great that you have so much experience across the board, because it really does give you a well-rounded sense of, you know, what you're doing when it comes to the writing. You can really kind of like limit those kinds of, you know, potential problems down the road. Now,
street cred.
Yeah, it does give you, of course, that's the cherry on top. You know, one thing that I've been kind of fortunate with right now during this whole period is I have the opportunity right now to start a new project. So I've been kind of working on it. And every single time I have a guest on the show, I'm always kind of like trying to pick their brains and see what their process is, because right now I'm still kind of like in the phase of outlining, and I'm very proud of myself. I got the second draft of my outline done yesterday, and I'm very methodical about everything because it's all, you know, bootlegged and everything, and I'll turn to crowdfunding eventually. But, you know, I always look at the actual production process, and what I love doing is I love drawing layouts. I like seeing the page in front of me as I'm doing it. Now, I don't think that you can always do that when you're working on a book. Like, you can't write a script and lay it out at the same time, especially when you're moving at the kind of pace that you're used to. So how do you keep yourself visually engaged while writing?
I tend to write this. Well, I outline and I do like page breakdowns and things like that. And I tend to write the script pretty close to full script. And if there's something that I'm having trouble articulating, I'll thumbnail it out. And usually when I'm working on a project with an artist, I'll say, you know, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. So I will say, if there's something that is a little confusing, do you mind if I give you a layout? Do you mind if I thumb it? And 99.99 times artists are like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. Thank you. Joe Caramagna, who's a letterer and writer, said when he letters, sometimes he gets like balloon placements. And he said, you know, placements are like pizza. Even when it's bad, it works.
Absolutely.
You know? Even when it's bad, it helps you, kind of thing. So even if the artist doesn't take any of the suggestions in the layout, it at least shows them that I'm trying to think visually and be on the same page with them. Going back to something that you said about asking questions, Steens, who is an editor with me at Mad Cave, wrote a fantastic Twitter thread the other day, and they said, these are sort of the tenets of being an editor. And the first one is do no harm. When I edit somebody's work and I'm giving a critique, I don't want to take their materials and create a story for myself, because it's not my story, it's their story. I want to take their materials and say, okay, let's see what you have here. Not all of these things are going to fit together. So let's go through and find what does fit together and then start building on that. And that's what I try and do. Some people are very, possessive of their stories, and I completely understand that. You created an idea, you want it to be the way you thought of it, and I get that. At the same time, what I always say is, if I'm coming to you with a question, it means that there's a hole here. And I can give you a suggestion on how to fill that hole, but I won't tell you how to fill that hole. So if you don't like my suggestion, that's fine, but acknowledge that the hole is still there. Don't just put a poster over it.
Yeah, it's gonna hit you in the ass. Yeah,
it's still there, and you might be 3 issues down the line, but it's still there. So I try to. I'm very methodical with my process, where I do like a timeline. What are the events that led up to the story? What are the events of the story? Then I do an outline of, okay, in what order are we going to see these events? I tend to write a lot of nonlinear storytelling. So in what order are we going to see these events? All right. And then, okay, which issue is going to be which? So I'm going to have this block is going to be issue 1, this block issue 2, this block issue 3, and so on. And then I go through the sequences and I say, okay, so this opening sequence is going to be, I'll write a sentence of what the opening sequence is, and it's going to be 2 pages. And then then we're going to cut to this, and it's going to be 2 pages. And then we're going to cut to this, and it's going to be 3 pages. And I break it down that way. And once I make that roadmap for myself, scripting is a lot easier, because I already have it.
You already kind of have it. And then from there, you can improve on whatever kind of feels like it doesn't work. And that's kind of
exactly.
I think that's the trick to everything. And the one thing that makes me I'm always asking myself those questions, like, because you're talking about those holes, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's always somewhere, and you kind of want, and there's always a point where you just kind of want to like bury it and forget about it. But there's that other aspect when you have editorial experience, it doesn't allow you to do that. Now, as an editor, you have to be incredibly patient, especially when you're working for a studio like Mad Cave, which is putting out a lot of stuff right now. They're, a big contender in the direct market, and they're also hitting up the convention scene too, which I also want to talk to you about as well. Mm-hmm. But as an editor, let's just go into that field first. You get in there and you have to read through everybody's work, and how difficult and how do you manage all this tenacity as the writer and artist and every other part in you to say, okay, I have to hush all that shit up right now because I got a book I got to edit and I got to focus on this. How do you give yourself that full attention? Because I think editorial that requires like 100% like tuning in to what's in front of you at the moment. Not that you have to divulge 100% of your time into that one comic, but when you're editing it, you can't really be thinking about your other projects. You have to really be honed in there. So how do you manage it, and how many books are you editing?
Right now I'm editing 3 books. I'm editing one series for Mad Cave, and then I'm editing some books for some indie creators. I'm very big on making like lists and parsing out my time and saying, okay, from 2 to 3:30, I'm doing this. And then from 3:45 to 4:15, I'm doing this. And I try and be as scheduled as possible with it.
That's fantastic.
One thing that always sort of once a week and sometimes twice a week, what'll always happen is I'll be, very rigid with my schedule and everything. And then I'll get this emergency email that'll just sort of topple everything. And it's like, you got to do this right now, kind of thing. And so that obviously is taking precedence and then takes me away from everything else. But then I try and find my way back to the, to the schedule and say, okay, so maybe I get up an hour early the next day and finish out whatever I had to finish from the night before. Or if I'm working with a client who is on the West Coast, because I'm on the East Coast, if I'm working with somebody on the West Coast, that extra 3 hours buys me a little time. Mm-hmm. If it's something they needed by end of day, okay, is it end of day my end of day or end of day your end of day? Kind of thing. And, being a freelancer, you have to be flexible. You absolutely have to be flexible. And you have to set boundaries. And that's probably the toughest thing. Like, I know people who say, I do not answer any work emails on the weekends. And I really need to start doing that. And I'm going to very gently start to try and do that. But you have to set boundaries and you have to stick to them. And it's very much a test of who you are, what your limits are. And if you are overstretched, you're not going to do anybody any good, yourself, your clients, nobody. So really finding, like the freelancer's conundrum is feast or famine. I want to take all the projects I can take because I don't know in 6 months if I'm going to have work. But at the same time, if you take all those projects, are you going to not do them to the fullest of your ability because you're so stretched thin? Or do you take a manageable amount of projects? And that's something that is really, really tough, especially in this current situation with COVID and everything, a lot of people being out of work. It is tough. But it's something that you sort of have to manage. There's this my husband's also a freelancer, and there's this great book called The Money Book. I don't know who it's by, but it's got this like bright, like sort of lime green cover. And if anybody wants to become a freelancer, I highly recommend this book because it talks about finances. It talks about, managing time. It talks about all kinds of things. And it really is, whether you use their sort of paradigm or not, it at least gives you some type of baseline, because there's a million different ways to do anything. But this at least gives you some type of baseline that you can then build your own schedule around. And I think that that's important. And I don't use any one, like I know people do like Pomodoro timing or like bullet journaling and things like that. I don't use any one specific thing. I sort of kind of a la carte it, but it works for me. And that I think is really important, is just sort of carving out your time, giving yourself space and saying like, I need to do this. Like if I have to close my studio door, put my, noise canceling headphones on and put a note on my door being like, do not disturb, then that's what I have to do because I got to focus for this hour and a half. One thing that I just want to add this real quick. One thing that I'm not good at doing, but that I read about in terms of like time management, is don't plot out time for more than like an hour and 15 or an hour and 20 minutes, because you tend to like wane at the end. So try doing things in like hour to hour 15 bursts, and then like a 10-15 minute break and then go back. I need to get better at that, because sometimes I just get like so into it, like 3 hours passed and I'm like, keeling over at the end of it. But that's something that I need to work on. But that is kind of was a little tidbit I heard on a podcast the other day. So
you're so much more organized than I am. Let me just tell you how it worked out for me. And there's some irony in this. So my wife, she wanted to take us out to the beach, which is about 45 minutes from our house. So we went last weekend and we went this weekend. Oddly enough, those were the only 2 days that I actually made progress with my outline. Every other day I was like out running errands, and like, the way my process is I just have a lot of thoughts going on in my head. And I don't really take that time, that like hour time, to sit down and do stuff, because lately what I've been doing is I've been digesting a shit ton of comics. Like I've read like a stack like this high so far, because I've just bought a bunch of shit, and then I have some stuff in my backlog that I, just stacked up. And what I'm looking for is trying to get a sense of different techniques, different art styles that I'm interested, seeing what works, what doesn't. And it's really just kind of like teaching myself, learning as I can from other creators and seeing, what they're doing right. But I don't know if I would call myself a freelancer, even though I have taken on some freelance work, but the majority of where I make my income is at conventions. And unfortunately right now that's all been put on hold.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that though, because that's something that I think is also an important aspect of what we do. And another interesting thing I want to touch on too, before we get into that, is you have a husband. So you got two incomes that are based on the freelance model. That has got to be challenging as hell between both of your schedules.
Yeah. It is challenging. I've only been freelance since 2016. He has been freelance since 2005. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when he first went freelance, it was we were both working corporate jobs. I was working at the ad agency, and he was working at a studio, and everything was sort of very regimented. Every 2 weeks you're going to get your paycheck, and this, that, and the next thing. But he is a voracious reader, and when we sat down and obviously had this conversation about him going freelance, it was okay. Do a monthly budget. What is there that we can, what can we cut out?
Yep.
But not for anything. We're both pretty simple people. We're both pretty,
of course.
We're both pretty we're both pretty lean in the sense of like spending wise and things like that. We don't eat out, and we don't eat out like
I have saved so much money on we don't eat out at all.
Yeah.
To be honest, since the COVID thing, we'll eat out sometimes, whatever, when it's like family events or something like that. But otherwise, you save so much goddamn money just going to the grocery store and stocking up on whatever you need.
Well, the other thing is that when you're working a corporate job or any type of job, rather, a lot of times you're buying your lunch there.
Yep.
So people don't think of it that way. And that in itself adds up.
It's like what, $20 a day?
Yeah. 15 to 20 bucks a day, 5 days a week.
Then you got coffee for when you get tired.
If you get coffee, if you get a snack throughout the day, or if you get like a snack on, if you're commuting home and you're on the train or something, you get a snack before you get on the train, whatever. All these things really add up. So we're both very sort of frugal when it comes to a lot of that stuff. So when we do have lean times, and I'm not going to say that we never do, because obviously, there's an ebb and flow to everything. We're very good about spending, and we tend to really try very hard to make things last. And neither one of us grew up in like an extravagant household. I grew up on assistance, for part of my childhood. So for me, it's like, okay, I really know how to make things stretch, so like we tend to be really good with that. And honestly, when he first went freelance, he got that book, and that book helped a lot because it teaches you, okay, so when you get your check in, your freelance check, you automatically put it into 3 different accounts. You have like your emergency account, you have your account for your taxes, because at the end of the year, you have to pay taxes. So you put in a little bit in each, and you do this with every single check that you get. So when the tax bill comes, well, this year it was July, but normally in April, when the tax bill comes in April, you already have a significant amount saved. It might not be the exact amount that you owe, but it's not going to be like you writing out a huge check. You already have some saved. And and a lot of times people get sticker shock with that. And this is something that I try, and obviously in the United States, every state has different tax laws and everything. And I'm by no means an accountant. So I don't want anybody watching this and thinking that I'm giving, accounting advice.
Tax advice.
Just, talk to an accountant.
Sure.
But the idea is like squirreling away just a little bit.
It's knowing where the money is going, which I think is
Exactly.
it's extremely important, especially, I have to do the same thing with my business. I have to look at, what goes into every convention, what I can actually pull out and pay myself, and what needs to go back into the business so that I have my operating expenses going. So let's get into conventions.
Okay.
So first off, how many conventions do you do a year? What are your goals when you go to conventions? How important is it to your financial well-being, given that you are a freelancer? And, what are some of your greater desires when you attend these shows?
Well, usually I would say I would do anywhere from 4 to 6 shows in a year. And you think, obviously these are broad generalities, but you think convention season usually goes from like late February, early March to like late October, early November. That's generally convention season. Obviously there are outliers.
Yeah.
But that's sort of like the general gist of it. So that's about 9 months. So I do between 4 and 6 conventions. I always do New York's just because I'm on the East Coast. It's kind of a local show for me. I try and do San Diego when I can. But when it comes to conventions are really tough to plan for, because you want to do different conventions every year, because you want to bring yourself to different markets. If you only do New York and San Diego, you're pretty much reaching everybody. But if you do smaller conventions, local conventions, then you want to go to other small local conventions and get yourself out there more. I do a lot of like small local conventions in New Jersey, New York, just because it's nearby. I do, I think the larger conventions that I would do would be like Boston, Motor City. I've done Salt Lake City.
I've never done that one. I was hoping to do it this year for the first time.
Oh, Salt Lake, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it's a great show.
A couple years ago. I was hoping to do Denver this year.
Yeah, that's a great show. I got in there one year and then they blacklisted me the last 2 years. But today they sent out like like the application for the 2021 show. So who knows? Maybe I'll get in again.
Always give it a try.
Yes, exactly. Never hurts to try.
But in terms of like when I go to conventions, in the beginning of the year, I usually reach out to convention organizers and I say, I would like to be a guest at your show. And if I can get a table comped, that's great. That is a huge check mark off the list. Absolutely. Because when you go to a convention, I was trying to explain to the students last year, just before New York Comic-Con had happened last year, and all the Kubert students were going. It was like part of their assignment was they had to go. I said, when I table at New York Comic-Con, I crossed the threshold already $600 in the hole between parking and the table and grabbing coffee for the morning, whatever. So I crossed that threshold and I have to make $600 or I make $0. And I think people don't really understand the economics of it. I think people think, oh, I made $1,000 at convention. Yeah, but how much were all these things? How much was the flight? How much was this? How much was the table? How much was dinner? How much? All of these things. And then you realize you made nothing and you're actually in the hole again.
Yes.
So I try and I try and explain that math because everybody's like, woo, I got a fat stack of cash. Well, that's great. That fat stack of cash is now paying yourself back for all the money that you laid out 6 months ago or 3 months ago, depending on, how far ahead the convention is. So my number one thing with conventions is obviously I want to connect with fans. I want to cover all of my costs for that particular convention. I want to sell books. I want to get the word out of what I've worked on. I want to network with other creators. I want to talk to other people coming up to me saying that they have an indie book they want me to edit, things like that. I want to not only sell the books and make money that way, but also use it as an opportunity to make connections with other potential clients.
Yeah, the network essentially. Yeah.
So for me, that's what's important about conventions. It's difficult right now, obviously, with no conventions, but there are a lot of conventions going online. Mainframe Comic-Con next month, I'll be doing that. It's August 15th and 16th. So I'll be doing panels and stuff for that. But most people when they go to conventions, one thing that I've learned over the years is that when you're tabling at a convention, it's really easy to get frustrated. And I always suggest tabling with somebody, whether it's another creator or it's like a friend, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. I always suggest that because that other person can be there to sort of like poke you with the cattle prod and be like, hey, you know, you're giving off a lot of negative vibes. Obviously, people are not going to like want to come to your table and look at your
chew some gum, motherfucker. Your breath is stinking.
If you're sitting there like, you know, like a crappy look on your face the whole time,
sure.
Then you're not engaging people. And so I always suggest that. But the other thing is that you want to be able to put your best foot forward. You know, people always say that you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and that really is true sometimes. Sometimes I've had people come back to me at conventions, like I'll see them at one convention and then they come to me at another one and say, oh, hey, you know, I saw you at New York Comic-Con and you looked kind of sad or you looked kind of angry. So I didn't want to bother you, but I really wanted to pick up this book. Do you have it? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll sell it to you. And I'm sorry, I kind of had a puss on my face that day because, you know, it was, you know, tiring or this. And especially these very long conventions like New York, 4 days, San Diego, 5 days. These are you're on your feet 12 to 14 hours a day. You get up early.
I miss it so much. I miss it so much.
I miss it, but at the same time, like there's a part of me that's just like, I just want to sleep.
I know. I honestly, like, given that San Diego was this weekend, the one thing I always love the most, and it's the most hellish part of the whole trip, is the anticipation of getting there and going through the hell that is that. You know, you wake up in the morning, getting into San Diego, getting the badge, and setting up 2 hours before the show and figuring out how the hell I'm going to do all that and then work for 3 hours. And then the other part that I really look forward to is the end, that red-eye flight that I take. And there's just something so freeing about it. I don't know what it is. And that's the part that sucks. I can't sleep on planes, but for some reason it's just this rush, you know? And yes, it's one of the most exhausting shows I do all year. Same with New York Comic-Con. But they're also my most profitable shows. So it's like, you know, you spend so much time kind of like preparing for it and going through so much on these shows, because I think we work in different capacities. And what you were saying about, you know, the looks on your face and, you know, the kind of vibes you give off and the impressions you give, you know, that's what it's all about on that floor, is making sure that you have a fortified front, no matter what it takes to get to that point.
Yeah.
And it's just, I miss it a lot. And, you know, that I can't wait to get back. I hope it'll be next year. I'm like keeping my fingers crossed. I've kind of given up hope that we'll see any conventions this year, but, you know, at this point, you know,
in all honesty, I think 2020 might be a wash. In terms of,
I think so. I think it's safer to say that. And in a lot of ways, I've come to accept that as okay, because now I'm in a position where I can work on that next project and I'll have something new. So, hey, I'll be making more money. The convention scene's coming back. We all know that, you know, and I think it'll be much stronger when it comes back, because everybody wants to go to Comic-Con. People need stuff to do. And especially with everything that's going on right now, I know that you and I promised we weren't going to get into it that deep, but we need a goddamn escape from it, because it's owning our lives right now. And we can't just dive into our work all the time. We also need to be able to interact with each other and to talk about things that bring us together. The one thing that I always found did that very well, even though I was not a big avid fan of it, was sport. You know, like a movie that really inspired me was Invictus. I don't know if I've ever.
I've seen it. It's great.
Yeah. And just seeing what Nelson Mandela managed to do by bringing people together through sport. I think comics and entertainment, what we do, very much so does that. But I think we're on a different side of it. We're on the side of it where we're the constant observers of. We're not just making this stuff. We have to read it, and when we're reading it, we're not just reading it for fun. You're not reading comics the way you did. The way you're reading comics now is not the way you were reading comics when you were a 10-year-old kid. Taking them from your brother.
It's a critical eye that you read it with now.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very different thing because it's not just critical in the sense of like, oh, this sucks. It's like, okay, why does this suck? Why am I not liking it? Why am I not liking this and everybody else is? Oh, this is fucking amazing. Why aren't more people reading it? It's like all this kind of stuff. So we're coming to the last 10 minutes of the show, and I wanted to ask you, we have a question from one of our listeners who's been listening, and he has paid attention to the fact, I don't know if it's a he or she, it's Captain Radon, but they have noticed that you are writing Mandrake is this Mandrake for King's Syndicate?
King Feature Syndicate.
Okay. Yes. And does it take place after King's Quest arc in the Phantom, Mandrake, and Flash Gordon?
It does. It's actually, what we've done is we've actually changed the timeline a bit. Mm-hmm. So the original Mandrake is there. I don't want to give too much away, but we have changed the timeline a bit. But we sort of shifted things up, so it's more now. So yes, it does technically take place after King's Quest and such.
That's awesome. So are you excited? Obviously you're excited about this project. Is that what's taking up your time right now?
Well, I finished writing the project. We're getting artwork in, and then I do a lettering pass where I look at the artwork and I look at the dialogue that I put, and I sort of tweak it to sort of match better with the artwork. So because I've already written it, it's now sort of like the promotional side and just getting artwork from the studio and such. What's mostly taking my time up is, while I am teaching still, I'm doing online teaching. I'm working on 2 other books. I'm editing 2 other books and then working on 2 other books for myself. I'm editing the Mad Cave series that we're hoping I can be able to talk about and announce closer to like New York Comic Con, like October, November time.
That's fantastic. So going into this whole thing of licensed material now, because we're kind of that's something I wanted to ask you about too. So that's obviously not as freeing as when you create your own thing. And I've done some licensed work, and it's like you got to pitch. You can't just go in there and say, hey, I got this story I want to tell with these characters. You have to get these stories approved by the actual license holders and all this stuff. So how is that experience for you? How do you kind of manage it, like especially when it's something that you may not necessarily be as familiar with?
I try and find it, whether it's a character I've heard of before or not. I try and research the character, and I try and find something about the character that I can relate to. And then I focus on that aspect of the character and making that character more relatable, so more people will want to read about them and interact with them. I mean, I think the number one thing that you want readers to do is to have an emotional connection to your characters. So if there's one little thing that I can find in a character that connects to me, then I can try and exploit that to make this character more relatable to others. When it comes to pitching, I mean, you can obviously tell an editor, oh, I have a story for, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, whomever, fill in the blank major label kind of thing. But a lot of the big 2 stuff is usually like 18 months in advance. So like you might have a storyline that's not going to gel with something that's going to come out in a year, so there's a lot of sort of moving parts and pieces with that. With smaller licensors like King Feature Syndicate or like IDW and things like that, they have smaller licenses. It's sort of easier to work with that in the sense that the vast majority, you don't have to sort of worry about these like giant crossovers that are going to happen all the time. I mean, yes, IDW has done crossovers and such, but it's not like an every 3 months kind of thing like Big Two. So working inside the sandbox with their rules is challenging, but I mean, you want to challenge yourself. You want to always push the boundaries and see what they'll allow and what they won't allow. And not in like an antagonistic way, but simply just like, and you can always argue your point. I mean, there are times that I've said, I would really like to do this with this character, and the licensor is pushed back. And I will say, well, this is why, because I feel that if we let this character do this, then the redemptive arc that they will have will be that much greater. Mm-hmm. And then it's, okay, I didn't see it that way. All right. Let's not take them this far. Let's bring them back a little bit, but they can, you find a compromise. Sure. And I think a lot of that comes down to compromise. And a lot of that has to do with this idea of, I said before, like putting your ego aside, being able to do that. You have to do that when you're working on licensed books. Like you have to
absolutely,
because you have to realize that they're the ones calling the shots. They're the ones that own the characters. And a lot of it comes down to like, is it on brand, and depending on the character, especially if you're dealing with like children's characters and things like that, there are a lot of restrictions with that, especially like young children's books and stuff. But it is a challenge, but I think it's a fun challenge because it's fun to be able to say that I got to write Hawkgirl. It's fun to be able to say that I got to write Daredevil and, and Misty Knight. And so a lot of it comes down to just sort of reframing your expectations. I think a lot of things in life would be a lot easier if people manage their expectations and they sort of lower the expectations just a hair. Because everybody expects the world. And then when you get like, normal, it's this, huge letdown. So I think we all need to sort of temper our expectations in general, whether it's relationships or business or whatever, be a little more realistic. So
I couldn't have said it better myself. I agree 100% with you. Let's all chill out.
Yeah, everybody just bring it down a bit. Just
I agree.
Relax just a little.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, once we start to see these things come back at it when the time is right, I think that will naturally happen. So, yeah. But Erica, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. It is such a pleasure to now know you, and I hope that we can meet each other in person at a convention. Do us a favor, give us one last shout out, tell us where we can find you and all that wonderful stuff.
Okay, so I am on Twitter at Erica Schultz 42. I am on Instagram at Erica Schultz Writes. I do have a Facebook author page, but I don't really use it very often. So whenever I post to Instagram, it posts to that too. But my website is Erica Schultz Writes, WRITES.com. And I've got an online store if you want to pick up books. And that's pretty much it. I've got the new Mandrake coming out. Forgotten Home from ComiXology Originals was collected last month. So you can go and get that on ComiXology Unlimited, ComiXology Kindle Unlimited, or Prime Reading. M3's out. Daredevil you can get on ComiXology or Marvel Unlimited. Trying to think what else. Charmed and Xena, those are also on ComiXology, or if you want to pick them up in print, they are on my website.
Excellent. Erica, thank you again so much for coming on the show. Do me a favor, hang out backstage. I'm just going to close out the show real quick. Yeah, all right, hang tight here.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, thank you. What a great episode. What an awesome guest. So full of knowledge, so full of enthusiasm, and so full of wisdom. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever it is. It's either somewhere around here. It's under the screen, under me. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. I will see you tomorrow with another episode. Until that time comes, onward to victory.